what are you having issues with today? What are you not able to get across the line? How can we help you? And I started to focus on the problem statement. I started to focus on what is going to be that thing that is going to, I'm talking to you for a reason, right? You're contacting us and you're trying to fulfill a need. What is that problem and what can I do to potentially help you with the problem? And the minute I started to focus on the problems and the emotional aspects of stuff, it built trust. Building trust, then we can start to talk about how we can try to build a solution for what that is versus me trying to sell you some big thing when maybe all you need is this sort of sliver. And so I really started to focus on sort of that relationship-based sales.
Have you ever wondered how successful architecture, engineering, and construction companies scale their business?
Or have you ever wanted guidance on how to get more growth, wealth, and freedom from your AEC company?
Well, then you're in luck. Hi, I'm Will Forat.
And I'm Justin Nagel, and we're your podcast hosts.
We interview successful AEC business leaders to learn how they use people, process, and technology to scale their businesses.
So sit back and get ready to learn from the industry's best. This is
Building Scale.
Hey listeners, it's Will here. Our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy. If you've ever listened to our show, then you know that the 3 pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology. So if you suspect technology is your weak link, then book a call with us to see where we can help maximize your company's IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
Today's guest is Scott Franchini, partner of RedHammer, an outsourced accounting company focused on the construction industry. Scott brings over 25 years of experience in financial software implementations and has worked with both Deloitte and Microsoft. RedHammer excels in providing outsourced accounting services, system remediation and implementations, and business process management. Their mission is to help construction companies optimize their financial systems and processes, ensuring that their financials are both accurate and timely. Their full suite of services encompasses every aspect of financial management, including accounts payable and receivable, job costings, payroll, cash management, and month-end close and work in project or WIP, and financial reporting. They employ a fractional team-based approach, allowing their clients to access their specialized expertise when they need it without the overhead of a full-time staff. And with all that said, Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Yes, this is very monies. It's all the monies. That's what I keep hearing about you. You like the monies, or you just like to help with the monies. That's right. Where I think is really important. We don't always go super deep on some of these things, and I think that you're going to be able to really showcase why money is important, which should be pretty obvious for most business owners. But you're going to give that perspective. But before we get into that, you tell me the real story. I said all these great things, but tell us what's your origin story and how you got into the accounting construction business.
Awesome. So went to Arizona State University, graduated.
Go Devils.
Gosh, yeah, go Devils, 30 years ago. So 30 years, well, I guess I didn't graduate. I started 30 years ago. And actually was a supply chain major and came out, and I ended up getting a position over at Deloitte under their solutions department. And within a week, I was immediately flown out to Secaucus, New Jersey, and said, you're going to learn how to do this ERP software. So went through 2 weeks of training, came back, they boot camped me at a client, and I just had a knack for figuring things out. It was like a puzzle or a game to me. And I spent a good, 5.5 years at Deloitte, quickly moving up. I went from consultant to senior consultant to manager. I think I was the youngest manager in the country by 25. I ended up leaving Deloitte and went and worked for Microsoft for about a year, right before they actually switched over to Dynamics. Then I had this amazing opportunity and it was an amazing risk too, to go out and do some consulting on my own. And so I did. I did a leap of faith, went out there and did some independent consulting, and that eventually grew into a larger service integration business where we went out and did large-scale Oracle JD Edwards implementations for manufacturing, distribution, and construction companies. So I have a breadth of experience when it comes to not only companies with different industries, but understanding really business process management, redesign, data management. So it brings us an entirely unique approach as my career ended up changing in 2020. So right before COVID, I was having a conversation with Neil, who happened to be my buddy from Deloitte from 20 years earlier. We had worked on several projects in Hawaii, and he had started a business in 2011 named RedHammer. And he was at a point where he was literally on an island and wanted to expand its business. And I was looking to do something different and actually take a lot of my applicable skills and what I've learned and done for the past 20 at that point and apply it to a business. So we came together, and that's when we ended up launching the Arizona practice here, which essentially services the main land of the United States while he is handling Hawaii.
I love he was on an island by himself. That's very, very, very funny. It is certainly. So interesting. So in Hawaii, you're in Arizona. How do you make that connection work? How do you take what Hawaii had and drop it somewhere else?
Well, that was the amazing part about this. So up to that point, Neil and one of our other partners, Stephen Chang, had really taken RedHammer from this infancy stage of, having 3 clients and had grown them up to that point to have roughly, say, 50 clients. One of the key things that made them successful in the process was they didn't just stop at accounting. It was very, very much how do we grow this business? How do we scale? So they did a lot of things around technology in developing integrations and some items that help work with QuickBooks and Sage in order to extract information out, like financial statements and work in progress reports, et cetera. But one of the main things was that they started to look at outsourcing well before people started looking at outsourcing. And they worked together with one of our partners, Connext Global, that's in the Philippines. And from there, we started a relationship where we're able to essentially develop a program around outsourcing accountants. And so that's been a huge growth factor and a big factor in our success. They had built-in processes. They had a strategy around how to divvy up the work. And unlike some of the traditional accounting companies where, it's, hey, I'm going to give you a resource, or you want to use, Robert Half, and I need an AP person. We took a different approach. We took a team approach. We said, hey, every client needs to have a team made up of fractional people. And we'll service that client through different skill sets so that they can get the most out of what we have. So you'd ask, how do you translate that from Hawaii to Arizona? Well, it wasn't as easy as we thought. I think we had some challenges along the way, but we had a backbone. We had a structure. We had a vehicle in order to allow us to do that. We also brought out one of their key managers to help me grow the business here in Arizona and establish those same principles. So we had a great blueprint. But with COVID happening or we were just post-COVID, we had to do some shifting and we had to modify the way we did things, ultimately, which benefited the entire organization as a result of it.
So when you talked about the Philippines and having, resources there, that's, this is now much more common. Like this is a thing that we see kind of across the board, but you were doing this before that. Mm-hmm. That still begs the question, how does one manage somebody else on the other side of the world? Like that,
great question.
That still goes to be true.
It's not easy, and there were a lot of failures initially, and what it came down to is a handful of things. Number one, we created defined roles. In my opinion, we invented the roles that are oftentimes now used for outsourced accounting, and so we were very definitive in saying, this person will do this person will do this, and this person will do this relative to their job responsibilities. We created levels of accountability within them. So if we have one accountant that's working on executing a work paper, doing reconciliations, we have peer review of another accountant that is essentially checking that work. We embedded layers of leadership at all levels, everything from the top down to position leaders that could serve as leads to the team in order to keep continuity and ensure that people are communicating and that they're working collectively together. So really the management of it and layering that in was an enormous piece of getting this machine to work. People tell me all the time, it's like, hey, we tried to, outsource, a couple accountants, and we just couldn't get them to do what we wanted them to do. The other side of it is we put them through a rigorous training program. They're not only learning, they all have a baseline of accounting, right? But they have to learn construction principles. Construction principles are not easy. Job costing is not easy. They have to learn about software. They have to learn about the different platforms and so forth. So we put them through a rigorous training process to bring them up to speed, to understand the things to support our business. So that's how we've done it.
All right. So talk to me a little bit about, did clients have concerns about actual outsourcing? Like, did you talk about this in any way?
Great question. It's changed. It was when we first came out of COVID, when there was less of maybe a dependency upon it, or I guess an acceptance of it, we got a lot of questions. And it wasn't necessarily, hey, do they know what they're doing? It was always a question of security, privacy, etc. And so that is always a concern. And essentially the way we reassure them is we talk through how we operate. We are always doing things on their software platform. All of our servers, everything that we have is all US based. Things like bank codes and so forth go through a central person, such as myself or another person in the organization that's at a management level. So we do a high level amount of security protocols, and we monitor that. Everybody goes through monthly security training. But to me, that has been the way that we've ultimately solved it. Even to the point where we've had to, push everything through a centralized server that's whitelisted from an IP address perspective, so they have confidence that the data is not necessarily getting outside of our two systems.
Okay, that's pretty technical for when we talk about security, more than most non-technical owners and partners would talk about. So, when it comes to hiring people, you talked a little bit about there's accounting and then there's construction accounting, right? And can you talk a little bit more about the challenges around what it takes to actually train someone and the difference in sort of that accounting? And give us even some stories or challenges and how you kind of came across this.
So training and the accounting side, it outside of our controllers that we hire that have a specific construction experience, it's not rare for us to hire somebody based on skill set and who they are. My partner and I both come from a Big Four. And the first thing you'll notice at all Big Four is everybody comes from different backgrounds, different educational backgrounds. They hire people that are competent, people that are adaptable, people that have critical thinking. And we've taken those principles and we actually apply them very much to the way we turn around and hire people. If you hire people purely off skill set, you will be disappointed, especially in our world where we have so much customer interaction. We've hired, for example, controllers that have come straight from the industry and try to put them into a more consultative role. It doesn't work. It's easier to take somebody who has been maybe that's worked for, say, a CPA that has had construction clients, and to have them adapt to our world. Funny enough, is some of our biggest successes, especially from the U.S. side, are people that have worked in the service industry. We have people that have been bartenders and waiters and flight attendants that have this educational background and they were in accounting and then they left for whatever reason and they try to come back in, and we're able to then embrace them because they're hungry, they want to learn, they have the communication skills, and we can actually get them across and make them extremely successful. I mean, they make themselves extremely successful because those are the kind of people that we go out and we seek. Now, the challenge is with construction accounting, we have so much experience. We have 70 people in the organization. We have, roughly 20 that are high-level professionals that understand construction accounting. We go through a rigorous training program when people come on board. They not only learn about how to do the construction accounting and learn the basics, but they also learn how to be consultative. They learn how to provide service value. They learn about deadlines and project management. They learn about the fundamentals of getting things across the line. We have training environments. We have training material. We provide, a lot of our onboarding is one-on-one. So, for example, it's not always our highest level people that are training our lowest level people. It's the person next to them, and it's the person directly above them. So there's a lot of shadowing, a lot of standard operating procedures that we instill. But yes, it's not easy. And it's something that we historically we're not great at, and we learned over time that if we start to follow this program, we can really get people up to speed and get them up fairly quick. It's definitely something that they have to grow into.
We talked a little bit about hiring. So why don't you talk a little bit about sort of philosophy around hiring and adaptability?
Sure.
How do you figure out that, that's a key part of, your hiring, what hiring looks like? And then talk a little bit about also client interactions, right? Because construction industry is very special in how they interact. They have zillion vendors, zillion partners. Like, things can get lost. Like, can get very complicated very fast. And the WIPs, work in progress reporting, like those can be quite taxing. So talk about when it comes to the people that you're hiring, how do you test for adaptability?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the first things that we do when we go out and we hire somebody, obviously we're going in, we're looking at their resume and so forth, which tells you this much, right? But the first thing we do is we actually push them through what's called a Predictive Index. And Predictive Index is a scientific method that this company's adopted. I'm pretty sure it's an open source one. Other companies like Culture Index do the very similar thing, and they're essentially personality tests. And Predictive Index measures dominance, extroversion, patience, and formality, and essentially it'll score them relative to the standard deviation of most people. And that tells you a lot. So by looking at the different scores, and again, you don't have to sit there and look at this from a raw data perspective. They'll put people into different categories, and there's no wrong category. People are who they are. But the fundamental aspect of this is that, hey, since you were 12, 13 years old, you're kind of who you are, and there's things you can learn, and there's certain things you can work on, but some of these things aren't really going to change. You are who you are in that sense. And so what we've done is we have a lot of people. We have 70 people, and we've had people that have come and gone. We've gone through, we send every recruit through it. So we have a ton of data on, who's successful, who is not successful. And we've been able to triangulate that. And so when we're looking at when somebody goes out and takes one of these surveys, not only are we looking at, what their personality type is, but we can then say, hey, how does that look compared to the other controllers that we have or the other techs? And what that process does, and this is one of my favorite things about the Predictive Index, is that it gives you an interview question list. And so what it does is it says, hey, this person is, X, Y, and Z, and here are the things that are really good about them. Validate these, ask these questions and validate these sort of answers. And the same thing is on, hey, this person shows, hey, they might be really, really impatient. Ask them this question and see how they answer it. And so our process is we have them take the test, and then we go in and we do a panel interview. So they either come on site, or in cases if they're a remote person, 2 or 3 people are asking the questions related to that. Other things that I look at, flexibility is a big thing for me. We're in an environment where we have clients that are remote, different time zones. We're super flexible with people. And so we obviously want them to be super flexible as well. That's a big thing. I believe that always wanting to learn and have a curiosity towards continuous education is such a quality that they have to have, this eagerness to learn. So we're always asking questions like, hey, tell me about what you like to read, or tell me what you're interested in, or where do you want your career to go? Or we'll ask a question, what's your ideal job? What would be the best job in the entire world? So we're looking for people that have some dynamic personality, but also are critical thinkers. We'll throw some of those oddball questions in, that Google does. And most of what we're trying to do there is to, hey, are they creative? Are they going in? Is there some level of critical thinking? And you would be shocked at just the lack of wanting to answer the question or try to be creative or funny. I mean, that's ultimately what we're looking for. And then from a gauge of, we go through accounting questions. We ask them about their Excel skills. I'll go a little deep on Excel. I find people tend to give themselves higher ratings than they really are. So we try to dig a little bit into, and actually it's an integrity thing, because I'll ask people, because I know Excel very, very well. And I'll go, okay, rank yourself on a 1 to 10 in Excel. And it's really a 2-part question. Number one, I do want to find out how good they are in Excel. Number 2, I want to figure out how honest they are. So I'm like, okay, why? Tell me why you think you're a 9. And then it starts to kind of break down, because there's only certain things if you're a 9. So it kind of helps me understand, the person they are, if they're going to tell the truth. I love the people that come in and says, I'm only a 6 because I can do this, but I really want to do this. So I'm looking for honesty. I think that's a big thing. It speaks towards the kind of person that they are. But yeah, I mean, those are some of the methods and the practices, that we do when we're going through our hiring process. And this is across the spectrum. We don't discriminate across, whether it's somebody in the Philippines or U.S. We're always using the same structure.
So I'm a little curious. We had talked in the pre-interview a little bit about a story about how your interview process helps find people, but it also helps kind of give a chance to people.
Yes.
Do you know the story that I'm talking about that we talked about in the pre-interview?
Absolutely. So
okay.
Yeah, so we recently had a gentleman come in, and it's the younger generation, and that's fine. I mean, everybody's different. It's a more casual world. Let's put it this way. And then so he came in to do the interview and did amazing. I mean, met the skill set. They felt he had a good personality, but he was underdressed. Let's just say, jeans, tennis shoes, and so they went back to the recruiter and they said, hey. Hey, we like this guy, but, his appearance just isn't what is needed, to go through this sort of interview. We interact with clients. We are, people are going on site. There's a professional aspect, to what we do. And they invited him back for a second interview. The recruiter actually relayed that information to him. Comes back for the second interview, jeans and T-shirt. So there's certain things you can't change in people, and that is a good example of just, if they can't adapt to just straight up feedback, then that becomes a problem. And I'll tell you, in my career, one of the best qualities, one of the number one qualities in people, is your ability, no matter who you are, is to take feedback from other people, and it tells you about their character and their ability to be vulnerable and to essentially look at things from multiple perspectives. I mean, that's where growth comes from. It doesn't come from people on the top always, telling you that. It comes from all sides. And so I find that, whether you agree with it or not, we're not talking about that necessarily, but listening to people and being able to fold that in to something I think is extremely important. So, we'd go through, not only we're hiring people, obviously we bring people in the organization, but we go through performance assessments twice a year, and it's self-assessment. And then we're following up with, a manager's assessment, and there's constant feedback. We do monthly surveys that we're going in and we're validating, the work that people are doing. We're always constantly giving feedback. And I think that's an extremely important thing. And people who don't like that feedback, they don't last very long.
So predictive index, I want to just narrow in on that for a second, babe, because it's different from DISC, right? It's different from a lot of the other, it's definitely closer to culture index.
Yeah. That very much.
So can you talk a little bit about, let's say, maybe where you figured out that there's certain personality types that might not work out, right? At least in the type of culture, in the type of company that you are.
Sure.
Where it didn't work out. And then after that, you're like, okay, this profile we can't have that, or at least in this role.
Sure. So the measurement, when they start to look at any one of the scales, like for example, dominance, they always start with, 0. And then they measure out in standard deviations to how extreme somebody is, okay, at each one of the A, B, C, and D. Then what they do is they layer in whatever the pattern is. So for an example, if you're like in a high, A, and then you're a low B, and then you're even a low C, and then you go over to a high D, that pattern represents a personality type, right? But then within that personality type, it could be along the lines of a standard deviation, or it could be extreme, okay? A good example, I'm a captain. My wife is a captain. I'm an extreme captain. I'm sitting on standard deviations of 2 in almost everything. My wife is closer. So those extremes are somewhat important just as much as the pattern. So the thing that we focus on the most is the pattern of behavior. So for an example, when we look at our controllers, we want them to tend to be a little bit on really kind of shrunk in the middle. And we want them to have an ability to manage people, because you don't want somebody that is absolutely, just submissive and is almost in the sense of overly democratic. They'll never get anything done. Yeah, they can't make decisions. And so
essentially, if they give feedback back, like if they were in a management position and an employee said, "Well, that's not a good idea," they'd be like, "Oh, okay," and not even question why.
Oh yeah, 100%. It's and it's crazy. So, another, if you look at the B, it's the socialization, right? We hired a great controller once, and she was almost a 3 deviation on when it came to her ability to be an extrovert, right? Oh man, that didn't work, because every time she'd get on a call with a client, all she wanted to do was talk. And we're dealing with accountants. Accountants don't necessarily aren't the most social people, and work wasn't getting done in that sense. And everything was meant as relationship building, and we encourage that, but it shows how much it matters. And honestly, a lot of the times it's about, oh God, this role's not going to work. This person's type of personality is probably not going to work in this dynamic. But the good thing is we do have different positions, and we have, we know where people fit. Like for example, our accounting techs, which are really responsible for our data entry. Precision. We want that precision. We want them to be able to be precise. That is a very high quality of that individual. And so those are things that we try to focus on. If they're loosey, goosey, and they're all the way to the left on the formality is what they call it, then that becomes a problem. But when we're talking about maybe our consultants or even our controllers, hey, that format, that preciseness doesn't necessarily, you don't want somebody overly precise there, because we don't want them chasing, $2, in a $100,000 bank reconciliation because they just have to get it. They have to get it right. No, there's better ways to do it, and there's more efficient ways to do it. So we want them to be thinking, hey, I don't need to be as precise. I need to be as good as I can, and then we can make some adjustments in order to get it right. And that's that's the difference between somebody who is somebody highly technical versus somebody who ultimately has to manage and get things across the line and get things done.
I like the deep dive into the personalities. I want to talk a little bit about process here.
Yeah.
What is not understood in construction accounting? I know that's a loaded question, but.
Well, let's break it down. I'm going to break it down into two things. I'm going to break it down into the functional aspect of it, and then I'll break down we'll talk the process management side of things. From a functional perspective, one of the biggest failure points we see companies go through when trying to hire somebody, whether it be a staff accountant or even a controller, is the lack of understanding of job costing. Not understanding the fundamentals of what makes up a job, what goes into the job, and how a job is measured. I came from a deep background in manufacturing and a lot of cost accounting. I look at construction jobs as larger versions of that, and everything needs to be tracked at a detailed level. And so oftentimes, if you don't understand those sort of fundamentals, which then play into much larger pictures, such as, revenue recognition, which is a very, very important thing, or play into, your ultimate WIP adjustments for over under, which are critical in the measurement of the business and things that the banks and the bonding companies are going to look at. So at the most raw rudimentary level, they have to understand the fundamentals of job costing and what makes that up. Understand, hey, this is a contract. These are change orders. Here's my budget. Here are my costs, and here's how my costs are funneling in. And then there's a whole other layer when you start to get into the true costing side, and the fundamentals of how you do that relative to a chart of accounts versus how you would handle that, through a project management system where you're using things like cost codes and so forth. So there's just, if they don't have this fundamental experience, and even taking even a step further, maybe even with the software, I find that the software is usually not a big deal, but you have to have that baseline. If they don't understand that, then they're not going to, if they don't understand the smallest, most, detailed part of it, they'll never understand the big picture, because all those things are just components that build up into a much larger item. And then from a process perspective, I look at construction accounting in its best, is a 360. And I look at it like this. You have somebody who goes out that estimates. That estimate turns into a budget. From that budget, you're determining what your contract is. Those then flow in and become the baseline for your financials, right? So you have obviously your scheduled values and how your contract, your scheduled values on how you're going to charge. You have your cost on how you're going to measure. But then you also have your project management system, which needs to work together. And this is often an area where there are a lot of problems. There's a lot of, let's just say, aging ERP systems. I don't know if I call them ERP, in the construction world. And then we have some leading, project management companies out there where, you've got the Procores and Builder Trends and so forth. But that project management and that measurement of those of the costs have to come together, right? There has to be some control. But then it's the feedback of that, right? It's how am I doing cost-wise against my budget? Am I on track? Am I off track? And why? Why are my material costs all of a sudden, so high? Well, maybe my material costs are high because I underestimated them, or maybe it's because there's a rise on the commodity costs, and I need to analyze that. But at the end of the day, going back to the 360, is you're doing all this and you want to analyze all this so that you can then tighten up your estimates. You want to be able to extract and gain the most profitability. And so oftentimes what we're doing is we're not just doing the work, we're trying to teach them the fundamentals of cost accounting and job costing. And some of that, like, for example, we'll sit down with our clients and we'll have monthly WIP meetings. And what we're doing is we're going through their particular projects. We're saying, hey, are all the change orders in? Has everything been accounted for on both the contract side as well as the budget side? Okay, how do you feel about where we're at relative to the progress? Where are we on a percent complete? Oh, well, there's no way that says 40%. We're actually 50%. Well, why is it 50%? Well, this last month, we were going to, in the budget, we were going to go rent this, boom, and it was going to cost us 50 grand. And, it didn't. We're using one of our own fixed assets. Okay. So let's account for that. And so that's where they have to go in and start to make some of those adjustments to their budget so they can start to tighten that up. We really just want to get them to look at this. So on a frequent basis, you can't do a WIP every week, but a month is pretty good if you're in a business where you have jobs that are extending over, 30 to 60 days, and you have a lot of moving parts and and maybe resources that are being consumed across multiple projects. But it's very much a learning experience in teaching them about the whole cyclical aspect of job costing and how, if you do it right, how it can really, really benefit you in every area of business.
So, because you're helping construction companies in some fractional sense or becoming their kind of entire accounting department, got any horror stories to share? I'm sure you have, and maybe even some warnings to people that are in the construction of, if you are doing this, or if you have done this, you may want to reconsider, and maybe even why, if it's not obvious.
So
maybe in a Chicago story.
I'm trying to think about this in the context of, I can talk about clients that, this is a tough one because I'm trying to put this in the context of without,
no names are going to be given. Yeah, no names are going to be given.
I think in general, it is not uncommon for us to go in. It's actually it is common. I'm going to put it this way. It is common for us to go into organizations who believe they have everything right and that they've been doing things the way that they should be doing for an extended period of time. And we go in and we look under the hood, and it's just a fundamental disaster. Their idea of what is reconciled is not. And so more times than not, we're having to go back to the previous point of where their taxes were previously filed, and we're having to start over at that point. And not in all cases. When I say start over, it doesn't necessarily mean we're re-entering stuff, but we're having to restart the reconciliations and start to go through that process to ensure everything is accounted for and that everything is effectively in the right spot. Some cases you can't go back and just do job costing for everything. Sometimes you have to create a centralized project and you throw everything in it and you call it a day. I mean, there's just some things you just simply cannot do. I find that the worst clients that we've had, when you have an owner who has a perception of what's going on, and then you have an employee who either A, has a perception, their own perception of what's going on, or B, they just fundamentally do not know what they're doing. And that can oftentimes be contentious. One of the things that we really, really do an amazing job at is becoming a part of the team. We are not one of those fly in once a month, fly out. We are interacting with our customers on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, depending on what we're doing. There's constant email communication. We're moving documents, behind the scenes, using, secure sites where there's just a lot of we're texting, there's a lot of communication going on. And oftentimes when, that doesn't take place, or, we had a client this last year who was just sabotaging absolutely everything. And
Can
finally,
you give examples? Like, can you give examples of what does sabotage look like?
it's big, and fraud is a big one. Sabotaging and fraud, pure fraud in the construction industry. And that's one thing that I can say is so prevalent because of the complexities with the amount of data that's moving across and the lot of multiple vendors. But to the point where she was literally going in and modifying PTO policies on people, including herself, paying herself extra money through different payroll runs. We believe there could be some potential fraud where she was set herself up as a vendor. And it's crazy on the construction. It's so prevalent. It's not about if it's going to happen, it's about when. And so that's actually a good thing to point out. One of our policies is we don't do treasury. So one of our ways that we protect ourselves and our company organizationally is we're not writing checks. We're not transferring money out. We're not paying bills. Those are things that we reserve to the client because we believe that they need to be in charge of the treasury. When we get access to their banks, we will not, if they have treasury functions, we will not interact with it. We want read-only. It's very explicit. We want read-only access to this. Now, if they have payment portals and they have their credit cards and they manage that, we're perfectly good with that, right? But it's to me, the fraudulent aspect of it, and just being aware of that. And here's the other great thing about having a third party is we can prevent a lot of that, or we see that stuff going on, and we're able to actually really serve as a third party that allows that natural segregation of duties. I mean, that's another great one too. Somebody who is buying things, paying things, and has access to checks and the banks. That's a no-no. You don't want the same person doing those functions. That is it's the best example of a pure segregation of duty, because somebody can go set themselves up as a vendor. They can go create an invoice. They can go pay themselves, and nobody is going to know. And they can do it very incrementally. So it's, to me, having that sort of segregation of duties and making sure that there's a level of accountability and that there's all eyes on everything really going, in and out of the business. I mean, even just, we have some customers where we're going in, and a lot of times it's because they're trying to manage their cash. We're going in, we're reviewing. We'll take a 30-minute meeting once a week or once a month, and we're going through AP and we're making decisions. And there's 3 or 4 people on the call, and they say, "Hey, what is that?" It's amazing what we end up discovering. And there are multiple times where somebody signed up for some subscription, and a year later it pops up and they don't need it. Okay, well, let's take care of that. So going through that review and not just putting it on one person is kind of a key thing too. So I guess a combination of those sort of things.
So fraud obviously comes in a lot of different forms. And what I'm hearing, keeping a separation of duties, you either have to have a large enough department to be able to keep that separation of duties, or use a third party to be able to essentially run the checks and balances.
Correct. Between
internal and external, right? You've done it by essentially saying you're not dealing with any of the treasury, so no account transfers out, right? Which is, I think, from a risk and liability perspective, I think that's a win-win for all parties involved. Mm-hmm. So I think we got a good idea, at least on some of the accounting aspects around the construction accounting. Why don't we talk about, you were in Hawaii, or company started in Hawaii, you're in Arizona. I can almost guarantee there's going to be at least one or two problems that you encountered almost immediately. One of those is, do you have any relationships when you started in Arizona? And let's start with that. Do you have any relationships starting up in Arizona?
You're saying, so when we came in, like what my relationships with anybody when we opened up the business?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Okay.
No, that was
so if you didn't have any relationships to start, that's that's like being a startup, starting from nothing. So if you didn't have relationships, how do you go from zero, right? It's way easier when you have existing relationships, because that flywheel keeps spinning. I mean, when you're at zero, that's a lot of weight to move to get it going.
Oh gosh, it was. So this is two-sided. So we did, when we first started, we did have an additional partner they're no longer a partner with us anymore. But we were sharing a business development person who was phenomenal and still a great friend and a connection to the business today. Does a lot of other stuff, but he's phenomenal person. And he was able, because he did have a lot of those relationships with, banks and insurance companies and so forth. But that was only one piece. The second part that was really, really difficult was there's the relationship side, but you have to be able to go in and convince them. So you can meet them, but now you got to go in and you've got to convince these guys to go convince their clients to go to you. And that to me was the hardest part. Walking into a brand new business. B, we had to go and kind of develop our own marketing collateral and yeah, in a sense, marketing collateral. In Hawaii, people know who RedHammer is. It's very relationship based, but they know who they are. When you're opening up to a new market, people want to, who are they? I'm going to go and jump on, their website. I want to go jump on their LinkedIn. Can you send me a one pager? What are your, what's your business proposition? I mean, all these sort of things that didn't exist because it was the way that they sold out there. It was just fundamentally different. So we had to go and almost, like you said, a startup, we had to go and almost build this stuff, not from scratch. Obviously we took all the great things but we had to slowly sort of build up, all those things, as well as a sense of confidence, so that when we're going out and we're selling to our customers, we're selling something that's for real. I mean, that's the worst thing you can do is oversell something and underdeliver, right? And so we had some initial success in bringing on customers because we had the avenues. But man, I tell you, the sales, I think I was batting for like 100 for a better part of a year. I mean, literally I was getting 1 out of 10. And I couldn't figure out why we weren't resonating. And our initial sales process involved me kind of coming in exec, and then I would have one of our controllers on the call, and it would be, back and forth. I would say this, and then she would come in and kind of fill in the details. And she's phenomenal and great, but for some reason it didn't resonate. And sadly, and I really do truly believe this. I go, sadly, she was a young female, and I think that people looked at that poorly, and they could not be more wrong about it. And it's insane to me, but I do think that was one of the reasons why some of these companies didn't come on board. And I thought it was absolutely ridiculous, but nonetheless, as things started to migrate, it was funny. It was, I was going in and every single call, I'd create this PowerPoint presentation, I'd pull their logo in, and I'd go through this sort of PowerPoint, and it just wasn't working. And then it was one day I did not have time to do it, and literally had no time to go in and do it. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to get on this call. And I sat there, and instead of sitting there, me going out and saying, here's what RedHammer is, here's our timeline, here's what we do, da, 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 and me talking for 15 minutes about who we are, I just went and said, hey, what are your problems? What are you having issues with today? What are you not able to get across the line? How can we help you? And I started to focus on the problem statement. I started to focus on what is going to be that thing that is going to, I'm talking to you for a reason, right? You're contacting us and you're trying to fulfill a need. What is that problem, and what can I do to potentially help you with the problem. And the minute I started to focus on the problems and the emotional aspects of stuff, it built trust. Building trust, then we can start to talk about how we can try to build a solution for what that is, versus me trying to sell you some big thing when maybe all you need is this sort of sliver. And so I really started to focus on sort of that relationship-based sales. Funny part is 360, that's what they do in Hawaii. So we don't come in with this heavy sales process. I'm not going to throw you a bunch of PowerPoints. If you want a one-pager, I'll send it to you. But at the end of the day, I am going to come into a meeting and I want to learn about what your problems are, what you're dealing with, and how we can turn around and solve them. And if we are not the right person to solve them, I will turn around and tell you who is or where you should go. One of the biggest fundamental problems we see all the time, and I hear this a lot, being that I am a member of EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, and I hear this all the time, is I need a CFO. I hear it all the time, I need a CFO, I need a CFO. And I ask them, well, why do you need a CFO? What is the reasoning that you need a CFO? Well, my financials are 60 days late, and, I just really need somebody to close the month, and I need somebody to help me with, my cash flow, and there's nothing in there about strategic purpose. There's nothing in there about, I need to work on the capitalization of my business, or I need to handle some debt, or I want to go out there, I want to buy another company, or I want to be sold, or I want to focus on strategic forecasting. It's usually they fall back on fundamentals. And I always come back and say, you don't need a CFO, you just need a controller. You just need somebody who has good sense of accounting that can come to your organization and get things straight. So I find it all just kind of fascinating on the needs and the misconceptions. So, when we're going through this process and we're selling, it really is. They have to be a fit, and we have to be a fit. It has to go both ways. Anytime we've ever tried to sell something for revenue, knowing that there could be a problem, it has been a failure. And we're getting to the point where we just have to we have to say no. We have to, and we have. But, if it's not going to work out, it's not going to work out. It's not worth the pain. It's not worth what you put on your people. That's really where I get the heartburn, is what it does to the people. So
it sounds like they need RedHammer, not a CFO.
Yes. And if they need a CFO, I will recommend one.
No, totally. Yeah, this has been awesome. Very intriguing in regards to the sales, like being more relationship driven, not going through all the features. A lot of service companies, they get stuck in the features aspect in comparison to, like, what's the result? What's the outcome you're looking for? And is it just for this thing? Is it for everything? And then kind of working the process that way on a true relationship in comparison to, like, here are the 38 things we could possibly do for you. So that's been great. And we're about at time here. So I want to kick off our last question here, which is, Scott, if you could go back 20 years, what would you tell yourself?
Oh my gosh. What would I tell myself 20 years ago? Well, 20 years ago, I was definitely a different person in the sense that to me, the image that you portray defines what sort, or the way, I guess, how do I put this? How you portray yourself is how people will perceive you relative to leadership. And I'm a firm believer that you have to be a rock. And if you're going in and you're providing calm to a situation, oftentimes we have, like I said, we have customers that are freaking out for whatever reason or not. The worst thing I can do is tell them that they should be freaking out. That's the worst thing I can do. It's about bringing calm to the situation. And if you do that, that helps allow them to vent, build trust, and then know that you can guide them through that. I think that, I think early on in my career, I was a fire starter. I was, aggressive, young. working through things, and I had my own sort of motivation, but sometimes that's not great for the larger picture of things, as it can stir things up and create animosity and so forth. And I had a senior manager tell me once at Deloitte, when I made a big deal out of stuff, he's like, you just got to be the rock. Like, if you're the steady one, then everybody else below you will look to that and say, okay, if he's calm, then we can remain calm. And I just believe that from a true leadership perspective. At the same time, it's always good to know when you should invoke emotion or you should invoke passion, because I think that's also another motivating factor. Because if they know you to be kind of this calm person, but then, which I'm not necessarily, but if you are a certain way and then all of a sudden you extrude a different personality, then they can start to look at maybe the seriousness of a situation. So I think, I'm not saying you have to necessarily be calculated, but just be aware of who you are and how people perceive you in that light. So that's what I would tell myself easily 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I think I would have gained a lot of value out of that. No,
that's good. That's good advice. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that, Scott?
Obviously, they can go to our website at redhammer.io. My email is sfranchini@redhammer.io. Those are probably the two best methods.
Awesome. Sounds great. This has been fun. Sorry, listeners, if there's a little bit of different sounding, little internet issues over at the Nagel residence today. But in any case, Scott, you've been fabulous. Thank you so much for your time. And to all our listeners, until next time, adios.
Adios.
Take care, guys. Adios.
Thanks for listening to Building Scale. To help us reach even more people, please share this episode with a friend, a colleague, or on social media.
Remember, the three pillars of scaling a business are people, process, and technology.
And our mission is to help the AEC industry protect itself by making technology easy.
So if you think your company's technology pillar could use some improvement, book a call with us to see how we can help maximize your IT and cybersecurity strategy. Just go to buildingscale.net/help.
And until next time,
keep building scale.
Scale.